Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Zim's Beer Review. I'm your host, Garrett Zimmer. Thanks for joining me. I know it's been a while. Been over a year, I think, since I did a review. A whole lot of stuff's been going on. We've been moving, had a lot of family stuff. Kids are growing up, and trying to find time for a podcast gets a little crazy sometimes. But we're in a quarantine right now. I'm working from home, not a lot going on. And so figured what better time than now to start up the Zim's Beer Review again. So welcome back. We have a little bit of a new setup. We're not live streaming anymore. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is the first time it's been on. If you haven't watched our reviews before, we used to live stream them, but we're going to divert from the live streaming and just simply record and upload. Gives me a little bit more control over the videos, a little behind the scenes stuff. But anyways, we're still going to have the audio version of the podcast. It's still going to be available everywhere that podcasts are found. So if that's how you prefer to intake the podcast and the beer reviews, then go ahead and do that. So anyways, we are reviewing another beer today. We have a beer sent to me from my mom, actually. It's from a brewery named Good Life Brewing Company. They're out of Bend, Oregon. You can see it on the side here. We're going to go ahead and try this beer. It's a Pacific ale, so it's going to end up being a lot like a pale ale, is what my thought is. Crack her open. Whoop. Very golden color. I guess it's a little bit darker gold, not what you would expect from like a slightly hazy look to it, but darker than a light beer. Darker than most pale ales, I would say, actually. This beer's, like I said, brewed in Bend, Oregon. They're a relatively small brewery from what I can tell. They've been around for a little while, and they have a pretty good hold in the brewing market, although I have yet to see them, to be honest. So this is a new one for me. I've never tried any of the Good Life Brewing beers before. I hope to try more in the future, but here's the first one. Really light. It almost tastes sweet, like maybe like pineapple a little bit. I'm definitely tasting like a pineapple flavor, which I didn't really expect. Just reading through the back of the can really quickly, it doesn't really mention anything about it, but very light beer. It's not that hoppy. It's I'd say less hoppy than a pale ale you would expect, which is kind of catches me off guard. I would expect something with this color to be a little bit hoppier, generally speaking. So this one's darker than your average pale ale, but less hoppy, I would say, than your average pale ale. Definitely an easy drinking beer, although it's 6%, so they hide it well. I think it's actually a really good beer. A little bit bitter on the back end, a little bit. It almost has a little bit of like that, like what people describe as like a skunky flavor to it. It's not really heavy, but it definitely starts off with like pineapple. It's sweet, really light, and then slightly skunky, not in a bad way at the end, but I wouldn't let that deter you. Anyways, if you're new to the channel, or if you're returning, we always do a little bit of a dive into the brewery, give you a little bit of information on them, where they're from, where they distribute. So if you find a beer on my review that you're interested in, I can kind of let you know where you might be able to find it. So Good Life Brewing, they actually started in Bend, Oregon in 2011. If you're unfamiliar with Bend, Oregon, or Oregon in general, it's kind of like a hotspot for craft brewing. Oregon in general has a lot of craft beer, and Bend specifically has quite a few breweries for the size of the town, I would say. Breweries per capita, if you will. Anyways, I would say that from what I can tell, the Good Life Brewing is one of the founders, considering they were the first brewery in Bend to actually can their beer. I think they started that just after opening in 2011. At the time, canning craft beer was, I wouldn't say frowned upon, but definitely not the norm. Most craft brews were delivered in bottles rather than cans. There was kind of like a stigma, I guess, against craft brewery beers in cans. It was almost looked at as like a cheaper beer. That's how you always, got your light beers, your Budweisers and your Coors. But there's been a big change. I'd say over the last 3 to 4 years, maybe even less, a lot of craft breweries have been switching from bottles to cans. It's much more recyclable and economic for them, and canning procedures have came a long way. Now, breweries are able to keep the same flavor in a can, not get that tin flavor that people always associated with cans. You can keep the same flavor of beer that you would in a bottle in a can. So it's much more recyclable. I think it's like 95% recyclable material, which a bottle is not. And the turnaround on recycling your own cans is far, far faster. So overall, it's just cheaper for breweries to do it. And now I would say in 2020, more craft breweries can their beer rather than bottle. Excuse me. So it's just kind of the way things are going. Anyways, the Good Life Brewery, they have distributing beer to 9 states currently: Oregon, Idaho, Washington, California, Hawaii, Vermont, Wyoming, which is where I am. I've never seen them before. And then they also deliver to Illinois, but it's Chicago only, and Pennsylvania, but it's Philadelphia only. So technically 9 states. I guess you could say 7 states and 2 cities. But anyways, this beer specifically that we're trying today, it's called Sweet As Pacific Ale, I guess is how you'd pronounce it. It was actually voted the best canned pale ale in America in 2013 and the best beach beer that same year. So they definitely know what they're doing with this beer specifically, and going back to how canning the beers, they were one of the pioneers of it. And so in 2013, they were probably one of few breweries that were canning. So they were awarded that best canned pale ale in 2013. Beers that they have 12 beers that are available, I believe, year round, pretty much a little bit of everything. They have this Pacific Ale, which is a pale ale, multiple IPAs, lagers, hazy pale ales, double IPAs, stouts, blondes. They got pretty much everything covered with their 12 beers. But anyways, something new that we're going to try to do today is what I'm going to call the website preview. So at the end of each podcast, I always give you the website. I put it in the description of where you can find more information on these breweries, but we're going to switch. So if you're watching the YouTube version of the podcast, on screen you can see a preview of their website. So just quickly, you can kind of see the Good Life Brewing Company. Right now it looks like they're doing 25% off. So if you're watching this in April of 2020, then maybe go ahead and check out their online store. Here's a list of the beers they have that I was mentioning. They got the Pacific Ale, multiple IPAs, lager, a hazy pale ale, a sauce IPA, the special sauce IPA. I'm going to have to check that one out. Interested. Little bit of everything here. The brewery itself, you can take a look at their location. So I was looking at this earlier. It looks like their map is a little bit of out of date. They list their states over here that they're available, but I don't think that they're all listed over here. We don't have California listed. Chicago, I guess the cities are a little bit harder to list than a state, but yeah, so right now they're available in 9 states, I said? 7 states and 2 cities. So yeah, this is kind of their website. You can take a look through everything that they have going on. Their brewmasters, their canning process, like I mentioned, that they were one of the first breweries, and they were the first brewery in Bend, Oregon to can their beer. So they kind of go through their whole canning process here, what they do, how they start with the empty cans without lids, get the beer in there, blast in some CO2, and then can it through up to 120 cans per minute. So they also make their own cans and for soft drinks and craft beer and coffee and tea and energy drinks, it says here. So they've not only can their beer, but they make their own cans, which is pretty cool feature that they have there. And so if you want to contact them or get in touch with them, this is where you can find more about the Good Life Brewing Company. So anyways, want to thank everybody for tuning in for another episode. If this is your first time, or even if you're a returning listener but you haven't ever checked it out, we have over here on the corner here, we have links to all the YouTubes, the Twitter, the Instagram. Please go ahead and follow, share. The podcast is available anywhere the podcasts are found. So iTunes, Google, pretty much everywhere, Spotify. I can kind of show you guys a little bit here. This is our new podcast homepage on anchor.com. You can come here and check out, listen on Spotify, donate to the podcast, helps this thing keep going. Send me a message if you have questions, comments, anything. I'd love to hear back from anybody if you have questions or comments. You can click here. We got links to all of our social medias. You can check us out on Spotify. I personally use Spotify. It's what I use for all my podcasts and my music, so it's super handy that they have podcasts on there in addition to just music. You can check us out on Instagram as well. And I think, we got a new thing coming up. If you're following the Instagram, you can see here we have a Hop Valley Brewery series that we're going to be doing here soon. Hopefully starting within the week. We're going to go through 5 different Hop Valley beers. So this is a little bit of a tease. And then we also have the Twitter. So if you're interested, please go ahead and follow. Links will be in the description of the video and the podcast. But anyways, thank you everybody for tuning in. And until next time, have a beer.